Welcome to the lecture covering the orientation for advanced legal document preparation. I'm going to follow along with the PowerPoint slides. You may also want to have a copy of the syllabus handy to refer to as we go forward. This is probably going to take us as much as an hour, perhaps even a little bit longer. So my suggestion for this and all the other lectures that we'll have in this course is to take a break every 15 or so minutes, pause the video, get up, stretch your legs, maybe get something to drink or something along those lines, because it's very difficult for our brain to process a lot of material in one sitting. So use the advantages that we have on an online course to pace yourself. I wish I could say that my online lectures are the most fascinating thing ever, but I'm being realistic here when I say it can be pretty dry stuff, and especially I think the topic in this course is a little bit on the less glamorous side, so I think you would benefit from having potential breaks. You may also find sometimes that you may want to refer to a lecture more than once. You may have picked up a technical point and missed another technical point. You watch it again, you may find it of value. So don't feel that you can only watch these lectures once. Use them as you think is most appropriate for you. And let me begin by welcoming you to the class. I'm very excited to be teaching this class. This is the first semester that I've taught this class, and I'm very excited about it. I am going to use this orientation hopefully to answer some questions that you may have about the course, as well as to introduce you a little bit to myself, as well as the course overall. Let me go to the next slide here. I am this lady right here. Not the most flattering picture, but I think you kind of get the general idea what I look like. My name is Cynthia Groover. I have been an attorney for, I guess, 24 years now. I started my career at a large law firm in Houston, and you'll hear me talk about that from time to time. And then I spent most of my career working in-house, which is the term that legal professionals use when you work for the client or you work for a corporation. And I was with JCPenney in Plano for many years, I guess about 17 years. Most of that time I worked as a labor and employment attorney. I was also a litigator at times. My employment law practice was sometimes in litigation, and it was sometimes in office practice, and we'll talk more about what those terms mean. I'm going to probably spend more time in this course than my average course going over the aspects of my practice, because when we talk about documents, I think it's helpful to have a comparison. Well, how were documents prepared in this place versus this place? What were the different concerns that people had in different environments? I have been at Collin College for about 4 years now, and I am fortunate enough to be the department chair of our department. And so I'm still learning. I've only been the department chair for one semester, but if you have overall questions about the program, for example, what electives you can take or how to complete, or the advantages of getting a certificate versus an AAS, or an AAS versus a certificate, I am delighted to field those questions. If I don't know the answer, I'll research it and find out what we need to have. I am hoping that we'll have an educational and productive time, but I also hope that we can have a little bit of fun along the way. My office is on the Preston Ridge campus, which is the Frisco campus, and I am in the library building, which is oftentimes called L, but that can be a source of a bit of confusion these days. If you haven't, here, let me flip around here, see if I can make this change. If you haven't been on campus recently, you may not be aware of the fact that D Building's name has changed. It is now Lawler Hall, because the Lawler family has donated a significant amount of money to our college. So there'll be some building, that building will be called LH. So the building without the H in it, being just L, is the library building, and my office is 232. If you've been to Professor Griggs' office before, that is where my office is now. I'll be having office hours this semester on Thursday nights from 7:30 to 9:30. Feel free to come by. This can be especially, if you don't have a lot of experience with legal documents, it can be a little intimidating to get started, and you may want to bring an example of a document to my office hours and say, hey, I'm on the right track, what am I doing wrong? I'm happy to meet with you to go over those types of things and talk about some choices that you made and where I might make a different choice and that type of thing. If you can't meet with me during my office hours, we can probably schedule a different time to meet. I don't review documents by email. It's really an interactive process where I talk about, well, here are the things that you ought to be concerned about and get your viewpoint. And so it's a discussion. So we would need to figure out a time that we can meet together, or if that's not possible, at least talk by telephone. And be aware of the fact that obviously if you're turning in an assignment that's due, Sunday night, probably I'm not going to be available to talk to you on Sunday. You're probably going to want to talk to me during the week. So you'd have to get it done a little bit on the early side. But even if you're not done with the document, if you've got questions or you anticipate having questions, we can talk about those things to make sure that you're at a point that you are feeling confident about what you're submitting. But my office hours aren't just to help you academically with this particular course, although certainly I can do that. I like to provide assistance to associates with respect to developing their resume, or perhaps their professional goals, what career direction they want to take. Many people who complete this course go into a position that is called paralegal. Some go on to law school, but others choose different paths, and it's not necessarily the case that becoming a paralegal or having that title is the only successful path that you can take upon the completion of our program. So remember to check your syllabus for my office hours. As I said, it's Thursday nights from 7:30 to 9:30, but you're not likely to remember that, so the syllabus will give you that information. And I hope to see you. If for another reason, if I haven't met you before, I certainly would appreciate you coming by and introducing yourself. I hate the idea of having students whom I haven't had the chance to meet and talk with personally. There is no required textbook for this course, so that's some good piece of information. You don't have to spend money for this particular textbook. All of the information that you need in this course you're going to find online in the Blackboard. There will be some times where you'll want to consult various form books, and fortunately we have those in the library. You'll find them on the Spring Creek Library, and I have right here a copy of one of the volumes of Dorsanio's. Dorsanio is a very famous SMU professor, William Dorsanio, or sometimes it's called Dorsanio. I don't know which one's exactly correct, but you'll hear both pronunciations in Texas. He has written these kind of powder or baby blue books with gold lettering called Texas Litigation Guide. You'll find this often in legal books. The names of books tend to be very bland. Texas Litigation Guide, it's hard to remember that. It's so bland. But of course the name Dorsanio is a rather distinctive name, so people won't call it Texas Litigation Guide. If you were to ask 100 Texas attorneys, what's the Texas Litigation Guide? My guess is no more than 40% would know, oh, you're talking about Dorsanio's. But if you say Dorsanio's, probably 90 of those 100 would immediately know what you're talking about. So when you're referring to these types of books, it's probably best to refer to it by the author's names. Similarly with O'Connor's, Texas Civil Forms, I wouldn't have known that it's called O'Connor's, but O'Connor's is a very famous name for form books, and you can see they have it for Texas Civil Forms and Federal Forms, and you can also find this in the library. Those are very useful books to have. Of course, you don't want to purchase these books. These books would be not so much O'Connor's, those wouldn't be prohibitively expensive, but there's no need to purchase them. Dorsanio's would be thousands of dollars to buy. Obviously, you don't want to purchase those, but you do want to use those books from time to time. Please go to the library, find them, so you're, probably sometime this week or next week, so you'll know where they are going forward. So when you need to use them, you'll have that resource. We have a different type of classroom than our traditional one, but I'm really trying to meet the needs that students have within the paradigm of an online classroom. I will be having online lectures. I think that's an easier way to present this information so you can actually see me editing documents and making stylistic choices. So please watch those lectures before you submit documents, and I think that will be a good resource. Also, it's going to be important that you do that so that you're successful on the tests. If you have questions about the material, send me an email. Actually, there's a few ways you can do it. One is you can come to my office hours. That's probably the single best approach, because most likely your question isn't something like, what font should I use? If that's really your question, you can email that to me, and I will tell you probably in a sentence what your font ought to be. I'm probably going to tell you Times New Roman, but there might be a situation where I might tell you a different font. But if it's a more involved question, like how should I set up this particular document? Well, that's not really a question that lends itself to an email response. So the way to think about this is, will the instructor be able to respond to my question in 25 words or less? And if you think to yourself and go, no, she probably can't do that, then what you're best served with, the way you're going to get the most complete answer that's going to be most helpful for you, is to come to my office hours. And if you can't do that, schedule a time that we can talk over the phone. And certainly email is a good way to figure out scheduling that time. So, come to my office hours, best choice. Second choice, schedule a time where you can talk by telephone. Third choice is send me that question, but realize I'm not going to respond to you individually with the answer. What I'm probably going to do is address that question in the online lecture that I'm going to be conducting. Now that means that you're going to have to catch me before I do the online lecture for that particular lesson. And so it behooves you to begin working early, especially if you're feeling a little uncertain in this subject area. So those are some strategies that you might want to think about. Another good strategy is networking in your class. Now, you don't have to, or obviously these are independent projects, so you can't take someone's work and duplicate that, but you certainly can work with that person. For example, both you and another student can go to the library and look at the example of Dorsanio's and discuss, well, how is this supposed to look, or where is this supposed to happen, or how do I do this thing on Word? Those types of things you definitely can talk with other classmates about or friends about. What you can't do is you can't take their copy or look at their example and duplicate it. And you also can't go to maybe a spouse or an employer or someone else who's a legal professional and say, can you do this for me? It needs to be your own work. You can always come to me with questions, and I'm usually quite generous with my help, but again, that does require that you make that commitment to come to my office hours and we can talk through things. Sometimes people have personal questions. Maybe they are seeking legal advice or something along those lines. I can't give legal advice, but I can refer you to competent attorneys that will be able to help you. So you can just send me an email message and I will give you an attorney that might be practicing in that area. Let's talk a little bit about the course layout. I've tried to organize this course in a way that I think is pretty intuitive, but the reality is that my mind and your mind aren't going to work exactly the same way. So you may find a few bumps along the way, some things I've failed to make changes on. I've significantly redesigned this course from the way Professor Griggs taught it, but there may be some remnants or some links that I somehow missed, and so don't be surprised if there's some dead ends. The best way to approach this is kind of like a scavenger hunt. Look in the nooks and crannies, try to discover all the different things out there so that you aren't missing some of the benefits that the course has. Also, if you find things that didn't work so well or you thought were a little clunky or counterintuitive, make a note of that, because the final week in this course I'm going to ask for your candid but polite feedback, and that would be an awesome time for you to say that, what you found less than ideal. Most of the course information for this course you're going to find in the learning modules. And you'll find that the front page of each learning module is a list of tasks that you ought to be accomplishing in that learning module. You might even want to print that up and kind of check it off as you go through. We face kind of a challenging semester because we only have 10 weeks for a course that ordinarily would be offered with 16 weeks. So most weeks we're going to have to do 2 weeks worth of work. So there isn't a lot of time to catch our breath. Please, please stay on focus and stay up with tasks. There's a few reasons why that's important. The first reason is I don't accept late homework. So if you're a minute late, it's going to be a 0. Be sure that you're not doing that. Part of the reason for that is, of course, the documents that we're preparing, in many cases, if you were genuinely a minute late, the court wouldn't accept the document. Some of the items won't be quite so time sensitive, but what we're trying to do is instill that ethic of it's important to meet deadlines. But probably a bigger reason why I'm doing this is that it's just not possible in an online class to manage multiple deadlines and get everything graded and know where everything is. It is true that in my face-to-face classes, I'm pretty lax about deadlines. I do allow assignments to be submitted late, and you may have been in my face-to-face classes, and so you may have been used to me accepting late work with only a small deduction. But that won't be the case here. I've already taught an online course, and I was very hard and fast about this rule. You can always come to me and explain to me your circumstances, but just be prepared that 99 times out of 100 I'm going to say, I'm sorry, but I'm not making an exception. You can ask, but just be prepared for that. And so work under the assumption that you'll have to meet that deadline. I only accept homework that is submitted in Blackboard. So don't send it by email. I won't open it. I won't grade it. It will be a non-event unless you and I have made previous arrangements. I get so many emails, it's just not possible for me to keep track of the various emails I get from students. So you need to let me know, or you need to send it through Blackboard. If there's some technical problem with your Blackboard and you can't post on a particular day, then you can send me an email and we will discuss whether there's some alternative way. But of course, if you're posting it, if you are waiting until the 11th hour to do it, I'm not going to be waiting by my email to respond to that. So if you anticipate there's problems, you and I probably ought to have worked out an approach several days early as to how we will handle it. Don't send me an email with an assignment unless we've agreed on a way of handling that. And as I said before, the vast majority of the time, we'll need to have that posted on Blackboard. Let me go forward from here. For this particular section, we will have an orientation quiz, and the purpose of the quiz is to confirm that you are familiar with what the policies are in this course, that you've looked at the syllabus and are familiar with it, and that you have watched this presentation as well as the orientation PowerPoint. It's a good idea to spend some quality time with these tools because many times if you don't, you'll forget an assignment or you will lose track of an important aspect such as the discussion board. So it is time well spent. The orientation quiz does not count toward a grade, but you do need to take it until you get to a 90. And you cannot take it more than once a day. So please take this test seriously so that you will be successful in the course and you won't have the frustration of missing something important in the process. Some students haven't taken a online course before or haven't used Blackboard extensively. And this is a very intensive, obviously, Blackboard course. And so I would recommend that you go to this particular link to learn a little bit more about how online courses work and how Blackboard works. You can also find the same information in the syllabus. Speaking of syllabuses, I encourage you to download or print the syllabus because let's say that your Blackboard is down or you're having some technical problems. Well, you may not be able to get into your syllabus to find out what you're supposed to do under those circumstances. So it's a good idea to have that kind of resource. You can also Google this information on the Collin.edu website, and you can find this link. As I said before, read your syllabus. I like to, or it is my experience that when I get a question from a student about a procedural matter, I would say 75% of the time the answer is findable in the syllabus. And if it's not in the syllabus, it's going to be in the orientation PowerPoint or the lecture. It's pretty rare that there is a procedural question that you won't find the answer to. So when you encounter those questions, think to yourself, let me look in the syllabus, let me look in the orientation PowerPoint, let me listen to the orientation lecture again. If those are dead ends, my next suggestion would be to talk to another student and look in the announcement sections. I use announcements all the time. You'll find that I probably post 2 or more announcements a week. An announcement that I post will be available to you in 2 different ways. You'll be able to find it on the home page of our Blackboard in a section entitled Announcements, but it will also be something that you will get from through a blast email to your Cougar Mail account. Now, some students will say, I don't really like to use my Cougar Mail account. I like to use my Gmail account or my Hotmail account or whatever else I use. That's fine. You can forward your Cougar Mail account to your real email account if you wish. You don't have to, but that's an option. Just be aware that you need to be seeing these emails however you go about doing it, whether it's by going to your Cougar Mail or it's going to your real email that has the Cougar Mail forwarded to it, or you just say once a day look at your announcements on Blackboard. Just be sure that you're looking at those places on a regular basis. If you've looked in all those places and you still haven't found the answer, then you're welcome to send me an email. Just be aware that if the answer is findable elsewhere, I'm probably not going to give you the answer. I'm probably going to refer you to that answer. One of the roles that we're trying to do with students is get them responsible for finding information. When you are a paralegal in practice, there won't be somebody like me who's there to fill in the blanks for you. You need to fill that in yourself as a professional. So I'm not going to be putting you in a disadvantage by not helping you develop those skills. The syllabus is available in the orientation module. And you're also responsible for watching all lectures. I was very surprised that I taught my first online course on this spring, and I was very surprised to see how many students did not watch the lectures. I had about 25 students in class, and during the first several weeks I only had 2 or 3 attend my live lectures. It is so important to watch lectures. If you, especially of course we don't have a textbook, if you miss the lectures, you are really missing out on the meat of the course, and you are not going to do well. Almost certainly you're not going to do well. So please, please take this seriously. This is one corner that you don't want to cut. It's going to directly impact your grade. You've found my lecture, so you know how to get onto Blackboard already. As you probably discovered, I do not link my Blackboard to Cougar Web. I find that it is not a very reliable way to use Blackboard, and I think having more than one path to get on can be confusing to students. Occasionally I will choose to link it because of some technical reason that one or more students are having trouble, and somehow or another it seems that having it linked to Cougar Web works, but I usually don't, just because it can cause other problems. So please access this through elearning.collin.edu. The benefit to this is that all you're relying upon at this point is that Blackboard is up. If you are entering through Cougar Web, you are requiring that Cougar Web is up and Blackboard is up, and they're playing nicely together, and that can present all kinds of problems. I'm looking for having as smooth a Blackboard experience for you as possible. I wish I could guarantee that you won't have any Blackboard problems. I've already had Blackboard problems this semester, and I anticipate that I'll likely have more. And you are a very lucky person if you don't have Blackboard problems at some point in this semester. Blackboard problems can fall into lots of different categories. It can be Blackboard that's a problem. It can be your computer. Not that your computer's broken, but the way that it's formatted can be a problem. It can be the version of Java that you're using. It can be the browser that you're using. It can be somehow some problem that Collin College has caused in the way that it set up the account. Or it can be something that I've messed up. Or occasionally it can be user error. So there's lots of different sources of problems here. Let me begin by saying that I am not a Blackboard expert. I am not a computer person. I know just enough to be dangerous. So if you have computer problems, it is unlikely that I'm going to be of great help. There's a few reasons for that. First of all, even if I were a whiz, I'm not looking at your computer, so when you're describing to me what buttons you're seeing, even if I knew how to solve it, since I'm not there, it's unlikely that I am going to be able to solve it. And number two, I'm just not a technical person in that area. I'm unlikely to have the answer. What I'm going to do now is tell you the pieces of advice that I do give to students. Many times these pieces of advice will help you resolve the problem, but many times they won't work. So file these answers away so that if you encounter problems, you will know, hey, these are some techniques that occasionally work. Let me go through the techniques. One technique is to make sure you have the current version of Java. If you find that you don't have the current version of Java, it's best to uninstall it and then to reinstall it with the latest version. You may also have to put up or take down your pop-up blocker so that the pop-up blockers will be allowed. Another thing to think about is changing the browser that you're using. I usually use Firefox. That I find is the most stable, but sometimes Firefox isn't stable with Blackboard, and I have definitely used Google Chrome and Internet Explorer from time to time. So play around with different browsers. Another problem can be the computer that you're using, especially if it is a computer that's older, that has fewer features, or that is a Mac. It can sometimes not like Blackboard, or maybe Blackboard doesn't like it. So you may want to, if you have a family member with a different type of computer, you may want to experiment with that. Alternatively, you might want to go to the computer lab at Collin College. Your tuition grants you access to that computer, or actually all the computer labs. All you'll need is a college-wide ID to go there. And you will usually find that the computers there are configured in a way that you won't have you're less likely to have Blackboard problems there than elsewhere. And you may also find other students that will be able to help you. So that's another good reason to go to the computer lab. Another technique is to identify somebody in this class, or perhaps in your other life, who has familiar with computer issues, they may be able to be of support to you. The biggest source of support, though, is likely to be the ELC Center. That is the way that Collin College supports Blackboard and online learning generally. Those folks are available 24/7. You can send an email and you can connect in lots of different ways, including face-to-face meetings. That's a great resource. They have so much more information and so much more access than I do. So you are welcome to send me an email saying I'm having troubles. Just realize that I am not going to be somebody who's likely to be able to help you solve the problem. What I can do is I can, if I'm getting lots of emails from people, I can let the world know, hey, or maybe I get an email from the college, hey, there's Blackboard problems, and I can send a note to everyone, hey, not to panic, everyone's having this trouble. So you can send it to me for FYI purposes. Just be aware that I am not the person that's going to be able to fix the problem. Course requirements. Here are some things to keep in mind going forward. You need to log in at least 3 times a week. Now this is the standard that we established during the ordinary semester. I would say probably once a day, maybe not over the weekends, probably more like 5 times a week would be good in this semester because, again, we're covering 2 modules most weeks. So if 3 times made sense when we're covering 1 module a week, you can see how we need to increase that number. So I would say 3, maybe even as high as 5. Also check the announcements in the discussion board each time that you log in. The announcements, make sure you've seen everything, especially if you're not routinely looking at your Cougar Mail account. And you will also want to look at the discussion board. Many weeks will have more than 1 discussion board, and so you want to make sure that you're posting on any discussion board that you need to, and that you're posting at least 3 a week. And so in order to accomplish that, you're going to have to post something and then wait for people to post things so you can respond to it. So it's not something you're going to be able to wait until the last day to accomplish. Your post must be made over at least 2 days. So most postings are going to close at 11:59 on Sunday night, which means at the very latest you're going to have to make your first posting on Saturday. But I'd really encourage you to make at least your first post on Monday or Tuesday of the week. It will help your classmates who have to respond to the post out. Look for the learning module at the right hand of the website. So that's where you're going to be spending most of your time. And keep in mind that just because something says Learning Module 1, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're only covering 1 module in a week. You can look at the syllabus for more specifics about that. The learning modules are designed to help you make sure you're not missing assignments or resources or due dates. So please spend some time getting familiar with your organization and make sure probably on Saturday or Sunday or the latest Monday you know what you need to accomplish and you can budget things out. You can work ahead. I encourage you to do so, especially if you find a certain section easy. Don't just sit back and say, oh, this was easy, because there may be a unit later on that involves more work, and you may find yourself in a pickle when that situation arises. Oops, excuse me. There is a sample documents folder. This is going to be very helpful. I know the name of our course sounds a little intimidating, Advanced Legal Document Preparation. I invariably get the question, well, where's the intro or the beginner legal document preparation? Well, we don't have one. The name of the course is actually not something that Collin College selects. There's something called the WECM, which is the Workforce, I'm not sure what it stands for. Anyway, it's for programs like paralegal. And the state of Texas comes up with the names, the course numbers, and the student learning outcomes for that particular course. And so we identify the courses from that roster and say these are the courses that we want to offer. So it has kind of a quirky name, that's the background for it, but it really isn't an advanced course. There's actually very little writing that you'll need to do. Well, I'll say very little. There's relatively little writing that you need. This is not an intense writing course. It is much more about formatting, getting your documents to look the right way. Now that sounds kind of easy. Okay, well I know how to format. I know how to make a Word document. But many times in the legal business there's very specific things, little tricks of Word that you may not know yet. And I'm going to show you some of them and show you how the documents ought to look. It is a pretty technical area. Having sample documents to reference can be very helpful. You can also, of course, go to Dorsanio's and O'Connor's to find more examples. and the sample documents folders will be a help. Please refer to these resources frequently. And again, if you feel stumped, if you look and go, I have no idea what it's supposed to look like or what I'm doing wrong and my document doesn't look right, come to my office hours. I'd be delighted to talk in more detail. Exigent circumstances. I already said this, but I don't accept late work. Again, except in very, very unusual circumstances. The fact that your computer crashes is not an unusual circumstance. Please back up your work regularly, and please plan on turning your work in early so you won't face that contingency. Most of these assignments can be completed in a relatively short time, especially if you're recreating an assignment that you've already done. Then you've already learned the tricks of the trade about how to get it to look right. Sometimes students will say, well, I'm using something other than Word. You can use other things other than Word, but if you decide to PDF the document. The only documents I will accept are going to be .doc and .docx and PDF. Those are your choices. Of course, you can PDF virtually any document, but I will tell you that really, really, really think about doing it in Word format. I had a student in a previous semester who used a very stripped-down word processor, and it ended up costing her many, many hours of frustration, and her documents ultimately were not at the quality that I know she wanted them to be. So it really is worth your time and investment to do them in Word format. You can use WordPerfect and then PDF them, that's fine. It may sense as WordPerfect is a better choice than Word, but I will tell you nowadays Word is so ubiquitous that I would definitely not want you to buy WordPerfect. Now, if you're in an office environment where you have access to WordPerfect, and there still are some law firms that use it, then you can definitely prepare your documents in WordPerfect and then just PDF them. Now, I will tell you, I used to know all the secrets of WordPerfect, but I just don't. The knowledge I had is so dated that I've forgotten it, and it probably wouldn't be that helpful anyway nowadays. So the advice I'm going to give you is based upon using Microsoft Word. So that's another reason it may be useful to use Microsoft Word. Oops, excuse me. Communicating with me, please do. That's the most important thing to say. I love to hear from students. I love to hear what's on your mind. The best way to communicate with me is to come to my office hours. I would love, love, love to see you, especially if I haven't had a chance to meet you in a class. So please do come by. I realize sometimes that's not practical. You may have work in the evening, or you may have another class, and I certainly respect that. An alternative would be for us to set up a time where we can talk via telephone. And again, my office hours and telephone conversations are not just related to this class. I'm happy to help with resumes and other resources too. When you contact me, if it's not in person or via telephone during my office hours, the best way to reach me is via email. I am relatively rarely in my office. I work from home most of the time, and so a voicemail message is just going to sit on my telephone for quite a while. And in fact, right now my telephone isn't working at all, so I'm not sure when it will be working because I'm in the process of moving from one office to another. So email is the best way to communicate with me if you're not talking with me live or seeing me in person live. A couple of things I want to talk about, though, with respect to email, and we'll actually talk about emailing later on in the course, but let me give you some hints. The first thing to keep in mind is your subject line. This is probably the most important part of your email. There are two things that you need in every email subject line that you send to an instructor. The first is the course. The second is a very brief summary of the issue. If the course has only one section in a given semester, you don't need to list a section. But let's say you're taking federal civil litigation. There's two sections being offered in a particular semester. Well, then you'd want to specify, LGLA 1342 SO1 or P70 or whatever the particular section is. And then you'll want to say what you're asking about. Maybe question about assignment 7 or something along those lines. Then you'll go to the actual email content. It's good to start with some kind of salutation. A good one is just Professor Groover or Professor Smith or whatever the name is. You can say dear, you can say hi, but it's best to kind of start the conversation out with a little bit of an introduction. And then in the next line, you'll want to briefly describe what your particular question is, keeping in mind that if it's a type of question that can't be answered in 25 words or less, your email really should be focused on, I've got this question, when can we discuss it? Because it's just not reasonable to ask somebody to draft a 400-word answer to a question. Most of the time, I find that when a question isn't focused, an email question isn't focused on a very specific issue, such as what type of font I should use or something along those lines, that the person asking the question really doesn't have a clear idea. They just are saying, tell me about this. You need to have a very focused question in order to get an answer that's going to be helpful to you, that's going to be satisfactory to you. And that's going to take a lot of work on your part. Most of the time when I get a broad question, the question is so broad, and I'm thinking to myself, they probably are really just having a specific question, but they've answered it so broadly, my answer, even if it's very long, may not even address what they're interested in. So be sure that your question is worded tightly. And here's a few pieces of advice. First of all, your question probably needs to be at least as long as my answer is going to be. So if you have a 20-word question, probably you're going to not be satisfied with the answer. You're going to have to give me a lot more specifics in order for me to give an answer. Again, unless it's what type of font should I use. Another thing is that you have to step outside your own mind. Your question makes perfect sense to you, but I'm not looking at the document that you're looking at. I haven't had the frustrations that you've had with this particular format. So I need to be introduced to where you are in terms of the process. And so a good way to think about the question is, what if I were describing this to my brother or my mother or my father or something along those lines, and see if the question itself makes sense to somebody outside my own head. Another thing to do is to make sure that your email is grammatically correct and there isn't typos. Of course, that's especially important in this class because this class is all about formatting. So if you send me an email that's poorly formatted, that's not too likely to be impressive. So you're going to want to make sure that you're using paragraph forms, you're using correct punctuation, you're using correct grammar, you're using your spell, you're making sure that your words are spelled correctly, all that good stuff. One piece of advice that I have is don't send emails to instructors or potential employers or current employers via smartphones. There's two reasons for that. The first reason is if you're sending it by smartphone, you're probably not spending adequate time editing it, tweaking it, perfecting it. You are sending messages about your level of professionalism when you send an email. And people are drawing conclusions from that, and you want those conclusions to be positive, and so it's worth the time to do it well. And you're probably not going to be able to do it well on those tiny little keyboards. Secondly, many smartphones will say send by smartphone, and that really doesn't impress. I'm not going to say you should never, ever, ever do that. Let's say you're in traffic and you have an appointment with an instructor and you want the instructor to know you're running late. Well, that might be appropriate for you to send it, assuming you can do it safely. But otherwise, you ought to go ahead and go to a PC or to a Mac or at least to a laptop or something and spend some time to compose a note that's going to convey, hey, I value your time. I want you to know that I spent time composing this note carefully. And then, of course, you'll want to include your name, and you'll want to send it from your Cougar web address. So anyway, so that's just some information about sending emails. But for the most part, emails are best to say, hey, when can we talk in more detail, or to ask a very discrete question. If you have that broader question, just be aware that I'm probably not going to answer by an email, but I'll answer it through a lecture. Let's go to the next topic. Oh, I already included all this on here. I apologize. I forgot what was on here. Yes, I guess I pretty much already covered that, so let me go on to the next one. Private communication. Please don't include private matters either between you and another student or between you and me on the discussion board. Let's treat that information confidentially. Send it to me by email if it relates to me, or if it relates to another student, send that to the student in a private manner. We're supposed to remind students about the importance of treating each other with respect and courtesy. This is important, of course, when we're talking about the discussion board that we have. That's not rarely, if ever, been an issue in one of my classes, and I'm sure it won't be here, but I just do want to remind folks that it is important, obviously, to treat people with respect. Actually, I have a typo here. I apologize. There we go. And try to be clear and thorough with your posts. We don't want to use slang. We don't want to have typos like I just did. And we want to present a professional formatting from our documents. For some reason, my thing wants to go forward. In extreme cases, which I don't think will ever arise here, I would need to refer a matter to the Dean of Students for disciplinary action. You already know this, but let me repeat it. Don't email in all caps. Go ahead and if you capitalize one word in a post, that's probably about the most you want to do. Proofread all postings and emails before you send. Everybody has typos every now and again, but if it's habitual, that's not leaving a good impression. We already talked about announcements. We have them under the Announcements tab, which is our home page for this particular Blackboard. On the discussion board, you'll have the opportunity to exchange ideas and information with students. I will also have a section called Instructors Pointers. I may from time to time post things there that say, hey, I've gotten a lot of questions about what font to use here or what margins to use here. Let me just tell you what my recommendation is. So if you're having challenges with a particular assignment, that may be a good place to look for additional information. Here's how grades are calculated. 10% of your class grade is class participation. That has to do exclusively with your discussion board participation. This is the easiest 10 points in the course. But if you don't participate, guess what? It's 0%. You will automatically drop a letter grade if you don't participate. So to participate, it's an easy way of getting your grade increased. Then we have the weekly document preparation. Most weeks will have 1 or 2 documents that you need to prepare. Most of these documents are very straightforward and easy to prepare. They shouldn't take an extended amount of time because, again, you're not really drafting very much of the document itself. It's about formatting. We have a midterm and a final exam. They have to do with some of the topics that we cover in our lectures, as well as some grammar and other issues. They're somewhat broader than what we do in the weekly document preparation. We'll talk more about that as we get closer to those times. Maybe vocabulary might be some of the things we talk about. You'll have a weekly assignment, or maybe I should say a module assignment, and you'll have 1 or more of those each week. Sometimes people see things, for example, like you're supposed to do a certificate of formation. Your first thought is, I have no idea how to do a certificate of formation. I know that when I take business organizations, I'll learn about that. Well, the blessing of this course is you don't have to know anything about these particular topics. In theory, you don't have to have taken a single legal course to take this course. Now, I will tell you, if you're in this course and you've never taken a paralegal course and you don't have significant legal experience, this is probably not your best first course, because most people in this room will have had at least one and many times several courses. And because it has to do with being familiar with document formats, it can be a little bit overwhelming for this to be your first exposure. It's not a hard course at all. In fact, I would say it's on the easy side for courses. But if you don't have experience in this area, you may feel a little bit like a fish out of water. I am going to grade each document based upon a 30-point standard. That's not really that important in terms of your grade, because it's still going to be 50% of your grade, whether it's on a 10-point standard or a 30-point standard. That just gives me a little bit of ability to be a little bit more granular in my evaluation of the work. When we go to the midterm, there may be some duplication of questions from the orientation quiz. For the midterm as well as the final exam, you'll have an option about where you want to take or how you want to take those 2 tests. You can take both tests in the testing center on the Preston Ridge campus, or you can take one there and one through Proctor Now. Proctor Now is an online proctoring program. There are some advantages to using that versus the testing center and some disadvantages. I guess the big advantage is you don't have to leave your home. You can take the test in the convenience of your own home. The downsides, though, are several. First of all, for each test, it's going to cost you $15. If you take both tests, there will be $30. So that's one disadvantage. Another disadvantage is that your computer needs to have some technical capacity that are beyond what is required in order to just take a Blackboard course. For example, you'll need a webcam, and there will be other features that you'll need to check. You'll need to make sure your computer is capable of handling the requirements. But if you have the webcam and your computer is adequate and you're willing to pay the $15, you certainly can do that. If you decide you want to take a test via Proctor Now, you need to let me know at least a week in advance because I'll need to sit down with you and talk about, or we don't do it by telephone, it has to be in person, but we'll talk about what is required for your system. I'll go over some documents and we'll do a test run. I will create a dummy test which you will take, and you can go through all the steps. For the dummy test, you don't have to pay anything. That's free, and then that's best to do the dummy test when it's not a grade that's in play, and then you can see, oh, did I do everything I was supposed to? One of the challenges with Proctor Now is that the proctor is not watching your test-taking contemporaneously. It's taped and it'll be watched at a later time. So if you make a mistake, maybe a very innocent mistake, but an innocent mistake that looks suspicious, that's a problem. If you were doing something that looked suspicious in the testing center, a proctor in the testing center could approach you and say, what are you doing? And, oh, okay, now I understand what's happening, and the issue can be resolved. But it's more challenging to do with Proctor Now, and that's one of the disadvantages. What you're doing may be innocent, but if it looks suspicious, it is kind of putting a cloud over your test performance. Another somewhat downside of Proctor Now is kind of the reverse of the positive side, which you can get from your home. Because Proctor Now is designed to be proctoring the test, you're going to have people looking into your home. And so there's a certain level of intrusiveness that you might feel with that. But again, if you want to do that, that is absolutely fine with me. Maybe you're going to be out of town for that week, and it's not practical for you to come back to campus, so that might be a good solution if you have some kind of laptop that you'd be able to do that on. Of course, if you have to be out of town during the time that a final exam or a midterm is being offered, I will be delighted to let you take the test early, and that can be a way of avoiding this issue. Again, come talk to me if you find Proctor Now an interesting alternative. We will have a module in this course on ethics. You'll find in most of our courses we have a section on ethics, and so I wanted to alert you to that fact. There's lots of ethical issues relating to document preparation, and we want to touch on some of those. As I said, we will have a final examination which you can do via Proctor Now, as I said before, or you can do it through the Testing Center at Preston Ridge. It will cover document preparation, the ethics section, some grammar that we cover in the course, and other material that perhaps we haven't been tested on before, or it could be material that was covered on the midterm examination. Oops, excuse me. Class participation is really important. I want to have everyone active and feeling like they're included in the class. As I said before, it's 10% of your grade, so be sure to participate every week and begin early in the week. And monitor what your classmates are doing. The people in this class can be a great source of support academically as well as professionally. In order to get full credit for your discussion board posts each week, you are usually going to need to make one substantive post of your own, and you'll need to reply to 2 of your classmates. So you'll need to make 3 posts. Now each week, or at least that's the usual rule, but there will be some weeks where you may need to post either more or less than 3. So be sure to read the instructions for the particular discussion topic that you're working on that week. Again, you can't make all required posts on the same day, so you'll need to at least pace them out for 2 days, ideally doing one post, your initial post early in the week, and then your other 2 posts later on in the week. You're welcome to disagree, and we will likely have, so this is kind of funny, this is a controversial course, but we'll likely have some disagreement in the course, and maybe the disagreement isn't the right term. It is necessary in a course like this that we have some rules that say this is how we're going to do this. But there is a lot of alternatives in how you produce legal documents. So it's not the case that every single business letter is done in modified block format. Your business legal letter is done in modified block format. That's how we're going to do our letters in this course. But there are law firms who use block format. It's not wrong. It's not evil. It's perfectly acceptable, but it's less common. Most of the time I'm going to be choosing the approach either that I think is the most common or that I think is the best choice. But you may well find, especially if you're working currently, or maybe you have a friend or spouse who's working in a law firm, you may find that they say, oh, that's not how we do it here. It doesn't mean they're wrong. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong. But please be sure when you're submitting assignments for this class that you follow the goals. You can, of course, say in discussion board, that's not how we do it. I think that's useful for you to share your experiences. I like to hear about it, and other students may find it interesting. But when you're submitting documents, because I can't remember, okay, well, Sally's law firm does it in block format, so I'm going to grade hers differently than Larry's because he's doing his a modified block. That's just too much to expect. And one of the features about document formatting is that even paralegals who work in one law firm for their entire career are going to have to produce documents in different formats because they're going to have to follow local rules and the different conventions in different communities. So, and of course, if you switch law firms, you may well find that the particular document format is going to vary there. So it's useful to know different ways of formatting documents. Each week you can earn up to 10 points for your discussion board participation. If you don't make all 3 posts, obviously you're not going to get the 10 points. You will need to, when you're making your post, you will need to create your own thread, and you need to name your thread in a way that will identify the post. So you want to give it a unique name that other people aren't going to be using as well. Most of the time, weekly posts will be due before 11:59 p.m. on Sunday. And once we get to that time, unless for some reason I've extended it, the board will be closed and you won't be able to make a post after that time. And so even if you had something brilliant to say at 12:01 a.m. Monday morning, it's not going to be posted. No one else will see it, and you won't get credit for that in terms of your grade. Let's talk a little bit about substantive postings. You need to make 3 postings, but it can't be just any posting. Number one, of course, has to address the subject that is the issue that you're supposed to post about. Discussions of the weather or politics or what you had for lunch or things like that are not going to count as posts. Ideally, it would be great if you could incorporate current events or what your law firm does, whether it's the same or different. That's especially helpful. It's very good for other folks to know what's going on. We want the discussion to be lively, and so if you wait until the very end, it's hard to get that lively discussion back and forth. You're doing a service to your other classmates by commenting earlier. You don't have to include current events. Sometimes it won't be appropriate, but when you can, that can be a helpful thing. I'm going to go to the next topic. Here's some frequently asked questions. We won't have any meetings for this class. This is a completely online class, so everything that we do will happen on Blackboard unless you come to my office hours. There will be no class meetings, but there will be online lectures such as this one, and I will record all of those lectures so you can watch them at your convenience. You can work ahead. It's pretty common, especially over the summer, for some folks to be away from their computers and from their class materials for some period of time. That's very understandable, and so please feel comfortable doing that. Just be aware that I'm not going to give you additional time for assignments. Please work ahead to address those issues. What happens if there's a computer problem? Just the solution is easy. Go to the computer lab. If you don't already, invest in a thumb drive, and whenever you're dealing with some computer issue, you have that thumb drive. You can easily take data from one place to another. In terms of feedback on your work, I will be grading all of your work. If you want a more thorough critique, you're not sure why you got a 20 on a 20 points out of 30 points, come to my office hours and we'll talk through ways you could have made it better. I'm happy to do that. It's best to do that in person versus doing it over the telephone, but we certainly can do that. I sometimes will post models of what I think is a good version of how the assignment will look, and so you can compare that version with the version that you have submitted. That can be a helpful way of evaluating your work. Let's assume you've gotten a 0 on assignment. Either you didn't submit it or you submitted something that wasn't up to snuff. Should you be panicking about that? No. Let me go back to the list of the breakdown of grades. I think that assignments are worth 50%. Well, we will have more than 5 assignments. We'll actually have a lot more than 5 assignments in this class. So Each assignment is worth less than 10%. So the fact that you get a 0 on a particular assignment doesn't even necessarily drop your grade a letter. It's not a good thing. Certainly, if it's say 10 o'clock on Sunday night and it's due 11:59, it's probably a good idea to submit something, even if it's not brilliant, than to get a complete 0 on the assignment. But if you do have to get a complete 0, you've just been sick of the dog and you just can't get it in, or you've had computer problems and you just can't figure out how to fix it, it's going to be okay. It's not going to sabotage your career. Even if you drop a letter grade, it certainly won't be more than a letter grade. Hopefully, let me pause here and just talk a little bit about grades generally. I am a big believer, especially in workforce courses, of really not looking at your grade as the end-all, the be-all of why you're taking these courses. I have had students who have not been academically inclined in my courses and have gone on to get really awesome jobs. Sometimes the reasons that they're not doing as well in courses, in the class compared to other students, are the reasons that they are successful out in the big world. For example, they may have been working full-time in a law-related business, and so it makes sense for them to really focus on their career, and yes, to do the schoolwork, but not make that the primary focus during that particular time. And so that person is perfectly justified in saying, look, I'm doing a great job at my real work, and so that means I might get a C in a few courses. That's okay. That's a very reasonable, logical decision to make. Some students have the luxury of not having to work full-time or not having family responsibilities at this point. And so they have the ability to focus more time on preparing for schoolwork. As a result, they may find that they are able to earn A's. The other students are just academically inclined and find it easy to get A's. Wonderful. If you're in one of those categories, congratulations. That's an awesome skill to have. Probably, though, more important than gaining A's in your career in terms of your progression is going to be, what can you show your employer you've gained from this course? In my experience, employers aren't overly impressed by lots of A's, but if you can show them a portfolio of work that are polished and professional, that is what is going to wow them. Usually the students who do better academically are going to have a better portfolio, but it doesn't necessarily follow in that sense. So more important than making sure you have all A's is making sure that you are learning the material that you are going to apply in the work environment. If it means you occasionally get a 0, I consider that nothing at all in the world to worry about, especially if you have a good reason. Let's pause though and talk for a second about how you get an A in a course. I am a strong believer in paralegal courses. It is really just a matter, it's almost a mathematical equation. The more time you invest in the course, the better your grade will be. This isn't math, this isn't calculus, this isn't brain surgery. There is very little in our courses that is inherently intellectually difficult. There's a lot of memorization, there's a lot of stuff to learn. I'm not trying to diminish the challenges, but it's rarely difficult to internalize. And I might make an exception for torts, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward stuff. You have to learn it. Some of it's not too intuitive, but it can be done. When I was in college, the rule of thumb that I was told was for every classroom hour, if you spend 1 hour outside of the classroom, so let's say it's a 3-credit course, and you spend 3 hours outside of the course, you can expect probably to get a C. If you spend 2 hours outside for each lecture hour, so in a 3-credit course, 3 hours in lecture, 6 hours studying, a total of 9 hours, that's probably going to prepare you for a B. If you do 3 hours outside for each hour in class for a total of 12 hours, that's probably going to get you an A. I found that to be a pretty reliable measure when I was in college. There's always exceptions, and I will be honest with you, probably our courses you can get an A with less investment than that. But that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, some students are naturally academically inclined, some students aren't, and so you may find that you need a little more, or maybe you don't need to do quite as much. And if English isn't your first language, that also presents additional challenges, which may mean that you need to spend a little bit more time. But because you have a second language, it makes you, in many senses, more marketable out there in the practice world. So it's really a benefit that you have as a professional. So the takeaway that I'm trying to say is that I assign the grade, but it's you that is working towards it. If you decide this is my primary focus, I really want an A in this course, and you're focused on it, it is a completely doable task. But you're the one that's going to do it. I'm just going to report your results. If you think, you know what, I've got other priorities this semester, I'm going to do the work, but I'm not going to stress about it, are you probably going to get an A? Probably not. But you'll probably do okay. You'll probably get out of the course what you need to. So, again, I already talked about this, but let's just reinforce. If your law firm does things differently than what I described, continue to do things the way you do things when you're at the law firm. And when you're in this class, do the things the way that I described doing the things. But feel free to talk about the way that you do things on the discussion board if you think that's something you want to chat about. I already talked about the sample documents folders. There is actually on the left hand of the screen, you can see the samples documents folder. It's also linked into many of the learning modules. Sometimes I get a question from students who are concerned that that a homework assignment maybe wasn't successfully posted or there's some other problem with it. Here's a couple of things to keep in mind with respect to that. First of all, I'm not going to start grading homework assignments until after the due date. I need to grade them all in one time so I can be consistent. And so that's the reason why I have a hard and fast deadline so I can sit down and do them all at one time. So if you submit yours early, that's awesome, wonderful. But just be aware that you're not going to get a grade any earlier by submitting it early. Number two, if you can see that it's posted, then if you can see it, I can see it. If you can't see it, probably means it's not there. So that's kind of how that works. If for some reason you post the wrong assignment or you think maybe there was some problem with the way it was posted, you can email me and I can permit you to make a second posting. Please don't do this too often. I know sometimes occasionally you'll hit the wrong button and post the wrong assignment. It's not a big deal if it happens once or twice. Let's not make a habit of it. If for some reason you just are a very suspicious person, there is another thing that you can do, and this is completely your choice, but some students find this reassuring to do. What I recommend if you are that type of person is to go ahead and post the assignment on Blackboard and then email the document to yourself right after you do that. So you'll have a time and date stamp that shows when your document was completed. And so in the highly unlikely event that Blackboard eats your posting or some other problem arises, maybe I inadvertently deleted or something like that, you will be able to present this evidence to me. One thing that I would ask you not to do is not to forward it to me via email. You just need to send it to yourself, and if it ever were to happen that we needed it, you would have that available. I do not send emails to let you know that you got your work. When it's graded, that's how you'll know that it's submitted. But again, you can send that email to yourself. Actually, I explained that process here. That if you can send it to yourself if you have that concern about it. If you miss a deadline, I'm sorry. There's no way to make up that work. I do not accept volunteer extra credit. Sometimes I do have extra credit projects. Usually it's because of either some task that our department needs to do or there's some enrichment activity that we're offering. Usually over the summer we don't have those types of activities, so I don't know if we will have any this summer, but if we do, I will let you know. But there's not really any point in asking. Either I will let you know about something or I won't. Here's a summary of how to make a good grade. Study the orientation module and revisit it midway through this term to make sure you're following everything that you need to. Ask questions when you don't understand. Go to office hours too. Proofread carefully. That's going to be a really important skill. If you don't have that skill yet, that is such an important skill for a legal professional to have. Turn in work by the due date. Make sure you're using that discussion board, and then using the resources that are on Blackboard. There's tons of them. And finally, watch those lectures. I hope that you have a wonderful semester. I'm really excited to have you in the class, and I know that we will have a good time. Don't be a stranger. I look forward to seeing you. Have a good rest of the week, and start working on the material, and hopefully I'll see some of you all on Thursday night. Take care. Best wishes.